Arizona Territory. April 18 for 7. The iron cage rattled against the wooden platform as another gust of desert wind swept through Tombstone's dusty auction square. Inside, a young Apache woman sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her dark eyes burning with the fury of a caged mountain lion. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd of rough miners and cattle ranchers, but his words seemed to fade into the scorching afternoon heat. What caught Ezra McCullough's attention wasn't the bidding war over stolen horses or the argument about water rights. It was the sight of human dignity being sold like livestock for $2 measly. Before we begin, we'd love for you to watch the story closely and, by the end, rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us understand the kind of stories you enjoy, and it guides us in creating even better content for you. Ezra McCullough had ridden into Tombstone that September morning with nothing more than the intention of buying supplies for his struggling ranch. The 34-year-old rancher had been working his land alone for 3 years now, ever since his wife Margaret had succumbed to fever during the harsh winter of 1844. His weathered hands gripped the reins of his old mare, Patience, as he surveyed the chaotic scene before him. The town square buzzed with activity. Merchants hawked their wares from wooden stalls, while cowboys and prospectors mingled in the shadows of the newly built saloons. But it was the human auction taking place on the raised platform that made Ezra's stomach turn. "What we got here is a fine specimen of Apache stock," hollered Jeremiah Blackwood, the auctioneer whose reputation for cruelty preceded him throughout the territory. "Caught her myself during a raid on their camp up north. Look at them hands strong as any man's. I reckon the girl couldn't have been more than 19 or 20 years old. Her long black hair hung in tangled braids, and her buckskin dress was torn and stained with dirt. But what struck Ezra most was the defiance in her posture. Even caged and humiliated, she sat with the bearing of someone who had never truly been broken. "Bidding starts at $5, Blackwood announced. The crowd remained largely silent. Most folks in these parts saw Apache people as nothing but dangerous enemies to be avoided or eliminated, not purchased. A few rough-looking men stepped forward, their intentions clearly dishonorable. $2, called out a grizzled prospector with gold teeth. "That's all she's worth to me. $2 it is. Anyone else?" Ezra felt something stir deep in his chest, a mixture of rage and compassion that he hadn't experienced since watching his wife suffer. Without thinking, he found himself stepping forward. "I'll take her," he said quietly. Blackwood squinted down at him. "You bidding, mister?" "I said I'll take her. $2, the auctioneer shrugged. "Sold to the quiet fella in the back." As Ezra approached the cage with coins in hand, the Apache girl's eyes met his for the first time. He expected to see fear or resignation, but instead found only curiosity and calculation. She was studying him, trying to determine whether he was better or worse than her current predicament. "Keys," Ezra said simply, extending his hand to Blackwood. "Now hold on there, friend. You might want to keep her locked up for a spell. These Apache can be mighty unpredictable." Ezra's blue eyes hardened. "The keys," reluctantly. Blackwood handed over the ring of iron keys. Ezra knelt beside the cage and began working the lock. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from anger at what he was witnessing. The lock clicked open. The girl remained perfectly still, watching him intently. "You're free to go," Ezra said in his rough but gentle voice. "I won't stop you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sounds of the busy town square faded into the background as they regarded each other. Finally, the girl spoke in heavily accented English. "You buy me to set free? I bought you because no human being should be sold like cattle." She climbed slowly out of the cage, her movements careful and controlled. Even after days of confinement, she moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to life in the wilderness. "Where you want me go?" she asked. Ezra hadn't thought that far ahead. He glanced around at the hostile faces in the crowd and realized that turning her loose in Tombstone would likely mean a death sentence. "I've got a ranch about 20 miles north of here," he heard himself saying. "You're welcome to stay until you figure out what you want to do." The girl tilted her head, studying him with those intelligent dark eyes. "Why you help me?" "Because it's the right thing to do. The ride to Ezra's ranch was conducted mostly in silence. The girl who had told him her name was Ayanna, meaning eternal blossom, in her language rode behind him on patience, her arms loosely circling his waist for balance. He could feel the tension in her body, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger or deception. The landscape around them was harsh, but beautiful rolling hills covered in sagebrush, and prickly pear cactus, with the distant mountains rising like purple giants against the endless sky. Ezra had fallen in love with this country the moment he first laid eyes on it. Despite all the hardships it had brought him. "Your woman," Ayanna said suddenly, breaking the long silence. "Where's she?" Ezra tensed. "She died 3 years back. Fever. You live alone?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why you not find new woman?" The question caught him off guard. In truth, he'd been so consumed with keeping the ranch running and dealing with his grief that he hadn't given much thought to remarrying. The few eligible women in the territory seemed to want men with more prosperous circumstances than a struggling cattle rancher could provide. "Haven't found the right one, I suppose," he answered honestly. They continued riding as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Ezra found himself stealing glances at his passenger, wondering about her story. How had she ended up captured? Where was her family? What kind of life had she known before being thrown into that cage? As if reading his thoughts, Ayanna spoke. "Again, my people, they all dead. Soldiers come in night, burn everything. I was hunting when it happened. Come back to find," she paused, her voice catching slightly. "Find nothing left." Ezra felt a familiar ache in his chest. Loss was something he understood all too well. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're not the one who killed them. No, but I'm sorry it happened to you." As they crested a small hill, Ezra's ranch came into view. It wasn't much to look at: a modest log cabin, a barn that needed repairs, and a small corral for the horses. About 50 head of cattle grazed in the distance, looking thin from the dry summer. "This your land?" Ayanna asked. "Every acre as far as you can see in any direction," Ezra replied with quiet pride. "Bought it with money I saved from working." Cattle drives back in Texas. As they approached the cabin, Ezra began to feel nervous. He'd been living alone for so long that he'd forgotten how to be around other people, especially a woman. And not just any woman, one who'd been through unimaginable trauma and had every reason to distrust him. He helped her down from the horse and led Patience to the small corral. Ayanna stood in the yard, taking in her surroundings with the careful attention of someone accustomed to assessing potential threats and escape routes. "You hungry?" Ezra asked, suddenly realizing he had no idea what Apache people typically ate. She nodded slowly. Inside the cabin, Ezra busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans, hardtack, and coffee. The space felt suddenly cramped with another person in it. His few possessions: a table and 2 chairs he'd made himself, a stone fireplace, his bedroll, and a small collection of books seemed sparse and masculine. Ayanna sat at the table, still watching him carefully. In the lamplight, he could see the exhaustion etched in her features, but also the strength. She had the bearing of someone who'd been a leader among her people, not just a follower. "Tell me about yourself," Ezra said as he set a plate before her. "What you want know. Anything you're willing to share." She was quiet for a long time, picking at the beans with her fingers rather than using the fork he'd provided. Finally, she spoke. "I was wife to war chief of my band. We have 2 children, boy and girl." Her voice remained steady, but Ezra could see the pain in her eyes. All gone now. The weight of her loss settled over the small cabin like a heavy blanket. Ezra had lost his beloved wife, but he couldn't imagine losing children as well. "I won't pretend to know what that feels like," he said gently, "but I know something about losing people you love." She nodded, seemingly appreciating his honesty. "Why you bring me here?" she asked. "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over." "You think I can start over?" Apache woman with no people, no family. Ezra met her gaze directly. "I think you're stronger than you realize. And I think tomorrow's always got possibilities that today doesn't." The first few weeks of Ayanna's stay at the ranch were marked by careful politeness and mutual uncertainty. Ezra gave her the cabin's single bedroom while he slept in the barn, despite her protests that she was accustomed to sleeping outdoors. During the day, They worked together on ranch chores with an efficiency that surprised them both. Ayanna proved to be remarkably capable. She could gentle a spooked horse with a few whispered words in her native tongue, track wounded cattle across rocky terrain that would confound most experienced ranchers, and prepare meals from the sparse ingredients in Ezra's pantry that were far more flavorful than anything he'd managed on his own. In return, Ezra shared his knowledge of cattle ranching and the complex web of relationships that governed life in the territory. He taught her to read and write English, something she picked up with startling speed. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire while she practiced writing letters and he read aloud from his small collection of books. "This word," she said one evening, pointing to a passage in his worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. "What it mean? Eternal. It means lasting forever, never ending. Like my name, Ayanna. Eternal blossom. Your parents chose well." She was quiet for a moment. "They think I would live long, see many seasons. They not know I would see everyone die." Ezra set down the book and looked at her. Over the past month, her appearance had transformed dramatically. The hollow look of trauma was fading from her eyes, and her natural beauty was becoming more apparent. She'd taken to braiding her hair with strips of leather and had sewn new clothes from fabric he'd purchased on his last trip to town. "You are living long," he said, "and you will see many more seasons." "How you know?" "Because you're here. Because you survived when others didn't. That's got to mean something." As autumn deepened into winter, their daily routine took on a comfortable rhythm. Ezra found himself looking forward to their evening conversations, and he noticed that Ayanna was beginning to smile more often. She had a sharp sense of humor that emerged gradually as her trust in him grew. One snowy December morning, she approached him while he was mending fence. "Ezra," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I want to tell you something." He set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "I know why you helped me that day in town. You have good heart, but I also know you lonely. I see how you look at place where your woman used to be." Ezra felt heat rise in his cheeks. He'd thought he'd been more subtle about his growing feelings for her. "I don't want you to feel obligated," he began. "I not feel obligated. I feel." She searched for the right word in English. "I feel home here, with you. First time since my people died that I feel home." The admission hung between them in the cold morning air. Ezra stepped closer, close enough to see the snowflakes caught in her dark eyelashes. "Are you saying you want to stay permanently?" "I saying I want build new life here with you if you want." Without another word, Ezra reached for her hands. They were small but strong, callous from work but gentle in his grasp. "I've wanted to ask you to stay since the day I brought you here," he admitted. "But I didn't want you to think I expected anything in return for helping you. You not expect." "I offer." That evening, they sat closer together by the fire than they ever had before. When Ayanna dozed off against his shoulder, Ezra remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe for fear of disturbing the moment. By spring of 1848, Ezra and Ayanna had become true partners in every sense of the word. She proved to have an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that complemented his methodical approach to ranching. Under their combined management, the ranch began to prosper in ways it never had when Ezra worked alone. One warm May morning, as they watched their expanded herd grazing in the distance, Ezra made a decision that had been months in the making. "Ayanna, there's something I want to ask you." She looked up from the wildflowers she'd been gathering, a slight smile on her lips. She'd grown beautiful in a way that took his breath away, not just physically, but with the confidence and peace that had gradually replaced the wounded weariness of their early days together. "You want to ask me be your wife?" she said, matter-of-factly. Ezra blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "I see how you look at me. Same way my first husband look at me when we young. And I see you practice what you want say when you think I not watching." Despite his embarrassment, Ezra couldn't help but laugh. "Was I that obvious to me? Yes. But I know you well now." He dropped to one knee in the wildflower meadow, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket, his mother's wedding ring, the only valuable thing he owned besides the ranch. "Ayanna, will you marry me? Will you take my name and help me build something lasting here?" She knelt down to face him, her dark eyes serious. You know what it mean. White man marry Apache woman. People in town, they not understand. They say cruel things. Let them talk. I know what matters. Your children, they be half Apache. Some people never accept them. Our children will be loved and protected. That's all that matters. She studied his face for a long moment, then slowly extended her hand. The ring fit perfectly. Yes, Ezra McCullough, I marry you. I take your name and your ranch in your heart, and I give you mine. They were married a week later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the territory. The ceremony took place in their own front yard, with no guests except the cattle and horses. Ayanna wore a white dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Ezra had ordered from back east, and he wore his best suit, the same one he'd been married in the first time. As they exchanged vows, Ezra couldn't help but think about the miraculous chain of events that had brought them together. If he hadn't decided to go to town that particular day, if he hadn't felt compelled to speak up at the auction, if she hadn't chosen to trust him. You thinking too much, Ayanna whispered during the preacher's lengthy blessing. Just thinking about how lucky I am. We both lucky. Now pay attention to preacher. As the months passed, Ayanna McCullough, that was now her legal name, proved herself to be everything Ezra could have hoped for in a partner and more. She brought a wisdom to their shared life that came from having experienced both profound loss and unexpected redemption. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with snow that lasted well into March and temperatures that killed several head of cattle. But they weathered it together, spending long evenings by the fire planning improvements to the ranch and sharing stories of their past lives. Tell me about your first wife, Ayanna said one snowy night. Ezra was quiet for a moment. This was a subject they'd never fully explored, though he knew she was curious. Margaret was a good woman, he said finally. We met in Texas, got married young. She wanted children badly, but he paused. She lost 3 babies before they could be born. The last one nearly killed her, and then the fever finished what the childbirth started. Ayanna reached for his hand. You love her very much. I did. But it was a different kind of love than what I feel for you. Different how? Ezra struggled to find the right words. With Margaret, everything was planned and proper. We did what was expected of married folks. But with you, everything feels like choice. Like we're creating something new every day. That spring brought news that gold had been discovered in California, and the territory began to see an influx of prospectors and settlers heading west. Some stopped at the ranch to rest and resupply, bringing news from the outside world and paying good money for fresh beef. One evening in late June, a family arrived at their door just as the sun was setting. The man was clearly exhausted, his wife was pale and weak, and their 2 young children clung to their mother's skirts with wide, frightened eyes. Begging your pardon, the man said, removing his hat. Name's Thomas Garrett. We're heading to California, but my wife's taken poorly. Wondered if we might rest here for the night. Ezra looked to Ayanna, who was already moving toward the wagon to help the sick woman. Of course, Ezra said, bring her inside. They spent the next 3 days nursing Mrs. Garrett back to health while entertaining her children and helping Mr. Garrett repair his wagon. When the family was ready to continue their journey, Thomas Garrett pulled Ezra aside. I can't thank you folks enough for your kindness, he said. Most people wouldn't have taken in strangers, especially, he glanced toward Ayanna, who was packing food for their journey. Especially what? Ezra's voice carried a warning edge. Well, you know, with her being Apache and all, folks around here got strong feelings about Indians. My wife, Ezra said slowly and distinctly, is the finest person I've ever known. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Garrett raised his hands placatingly. No offense meant, friend. I'm just saying you're both braver than most. After the family departed, Ayanna found Ezra sitting on the porch, staring out at the sunset. You troubled by what he say? She asked. Not troubled, just reminded of how the world sees us. She settled beside him on the wooden bench he'd built. You regret marrying me? Never. The word came out fiercely. I just hate that you have to deal with people's ignorance. I deal with ignorance all my life. But now I have someone who stand with me against it. That make all difference. That autumn, Ayanna began to show signs of pregnancy. They were both cautiously excited, having learned not to take anything for granted. As her belly grew, Ezra found himself becoming fiercely protective in a way that surprised even him. "You cannot wrap me in blankets and keep me in house." Ayanna laughed one morning when he tried to discourage her from helping with the cattle. "Apache women work until babies come. Well, you're a McCullough woman now, and McCullough women take care of themselves. I am Apache McCullough woman. I do both." Their son was born on a clear February morning in 1849. With only Ezra and a midwife from town in attendance, the baby was healthy and strong, with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "What should we name him?" Ezra asked, cradling the infant carefully. Ayanna smiled tiredly. "In my language, his name is Nalnish. It means he is working. But for white world, we call him Nathan. Nathan McCullough," Ezra said, testing the name. "I like it." As he looked down at his son, Ezra felt a profound sense of completion. This child represented not just the continuation of his bloodline, but the merging of two cultures, two histories, two ways of seeing the world. Over the following years, the McCullough Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where travelers could expect fair treatment regardless of their background. Ezra and Ayanna raised 3 more daughters they named Elena and Rosa, and another son they called Daniel. The children grew up bilingual, equally comfortable with Apache traditions and frontier American customs. Ayanna taught them to track animals, read weather patterns, and understand the language of the natural world. Ezra taught them to read and write, manage cattle, and conduct business with integrity. By 1855, their ranch had grown to encompass nearly 10,000 acres and employed a dozen cowboys. Ezra had become a respected voice in territorial politics, while Ayanna had earned recognition for her skill in treating both human and animal ailments with traditional Apache medicines. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Ayanna brought up a subject that had been on her mind for months. "Ezra, I want to tell you something important." He looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about that day in Tombstone, when you buy me from that terrible man." "What about it? You remember what you tell me. You say everyone deserves chance to start over." "I remember. You give me more than chance to start over. You give me new life, new name, new family. But most important, you give me choice every day. Since that day, I choose to be here. I choose to be your wife, mother to your children." Ezra reached for her hand, still moved by her words after all these years together. "And I choose you too," he said. "Every morning when I wake up, every evening when I come home from the range." Their oldest son, Nathan, now 6 years old, came running up to the porch with a question about the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. As Ayanna began explaining the Apache stories associated with various constellations, Ezra marveled at the richness their blended heritage brought to their children's lives. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Ezra made an announcement that surprised even him. "I've been thinking about changing how we do things around here," he said. "What you mean?" "I want to put the ranch in your name to legal-like. Half of everything we've built should belong to you." Ayanna stared at him in astonishment. "Ezra, that's not how things done. Ranch belong to husband, not this ranch. This ranch belongs to the partnership that built it. That's you and me, equal partners." The next week, they rode into town to have new legal documents drawn up. The lawyer, a thin man named Hutchins, was clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement. "Mr. McCullough, I have to advise against this course of action. Should something happen to you, your wife's background might make it difficult for her to maintain control of the property. Then I guess we'll have to make sure the documents are ironclad," Ezra replied firmly. When they emerged from the lawyer's office, Ayanna was holding papers that made her a legal owner of one of the largest ranches in the territory, probably the first Apache woman to hold such a position. "You realize what you just do?" she asked as they prepared to ride home. "I gave my wife what she's always deserved, recognition for everything she's contributed to our success." That evening, as they celebrated with a special dinner, their son Nathan asked a question that would stay with Ezra for years to come. "Papa, Why is Mama different from other ladies in town? Ezra and Ayanna exchanged glances. They'd been preparing for this conversation, knowing their children would eventually notice the way some people looked at their family. What do you mean, son? Well, she talks different sometimes, and she knows things the other ladies don't know, and sometimes people stare at us when we go to town. Ayanna knelt down to Nathan's level. I different because I born Apache. My people have different ways of seeing world, different language, different customs. But different not mean bad. Different means special. Are we special too? You very special, she said, gathering him into her arms. You have best of both worlds, Apache. Wisdom and white man's opportunities. That make you strong in ways other children not understand yet. Ezra watched this exchange with deep pride. His wife was raising their children to be proud of their heritage, while preparing them for the challenges they would inevitably face. 20 years later, in 1867, Ezra McCullough stood on the same porch where he'd had so many important conversations with his wife, now 51 years old. His hair was silver and his hands were weathered from decades of ranch work, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had compelled him to speak up. At that auction so long ago, Ayanna, at 39, had grown into a woman of remarkable presence. She'd become something of a legend in the territory, the Apache woman who'd married a white rancher and built an empire. Their children were grown now, with Nathan preparing to take over much of the ranch operations and the girls pursuing education. Back east. That morning, a young Apache man had arrived at their door, seeking work. He was one of several Native Americans who'd found employment at the McCullough Ranch over the years. Drawn by Ayanna's reputation for fairness and Ezra's willingness to judge people by their character rather than their background, reminds me of another lost soul who showed up here once, Ezra said, watching the young man work with the horses. I not lost soul, Ayanna protested with mock indignation. I was warrior woman who let herself be rescued by a handsome rancher. Is that how you remember it? That how I choose to remember it? As the sun set over their vast holdings, Ezra reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From a $2 purchase at a human auction to a partnership that had lasted more than 2 decades, their story was one of love conquering prejudice, of two wounded souls finding healing in each other. Any regrets? He asked, as he had many times over the years. Only one, Ayanna replied. What's that? I regret I not meet you sooner. Their youngest child, 10-year-old Daniel, came running up to announce that dinner was ready. As they walked inside together, Ezra couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. He'd gone to town that day in 1847 looking to buy supplies for his ranch. Instead, he'd found something infinitely more valuable: a partner, a love, and a future he never could have imagined. The McCullough Ranch would eventually grow to become one of the largest cattle operations in the Southwest, passing from generation to generation. But long after the business success faded into history, what people remembered was the story of the lonely rancher who saw humanity where others saw only profit, and the Apache warrior woman who chose love over fear. In the end, it wasn't about the $2 Ezra had paid at that auction. It was about the priceless treasure they'd built together: a family, a legacy, and a love story that proved that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships create the most extraordinary results. The name McCullough would live on through their children and grandchildren, but it would always carry with it the strength and wisdom of the woman who'd transformed it from a symbol of solitary struggle into a testament to the power of two hearts beating as one. As the stars appeared over the Arizona territory that night, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations and their wedding vows, Ezra and Ayanna McCullough sat together on their porch, still choosing each other, still building tomorrow from the ashes of yesterday. Now that you've watched the full story, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.